Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Reserved Investments, and thank you for joining me. This is part one of my 18,000 subscriber Q&A series. So if you are new to this channel, keep in mind, when I do Q&A videos, I tend to break up the videos because if I were to answer all of these questions in one sitting, this would be a 3 to 4 hour long video because I got asked roughly 80 to 100 questions in this Q&A alone. So I do like to go in depth with my answer. I will do my best to answer your questions in full. All is what I ask is every time I do a Q&A video, I get people that sometimes get a little bit upset with me because I may answer a question in a way they don't agree with. Keep in mind, if you are asking me questions about politics, my personal life, finance, my dating life, cultural events, whatever it is, I may answer the question in a way that you disagree with. But keep in mind, I'm entitled to my own opinion. You guys asked me the question, and I'm going to answer it in an honest manner. So I just hope that I don't trigger any of you. When we get to questions where I have to bring up either politics or something of a sensitive nature, I will mention that in advance. Now, luckily, I didn't get too many of those questions as part of this Q&A series, but make no mistake, there are some. And we are going to start at first with a couple of personal questions before we get into the hardcore questions on finance, collectibles, antiques, and the like. So here we go. First question. Sean, it seems like yesterday that I remember this channel was first starting out. But congrats on the 18,000 subscribers. One question I have is why did you choose the Eye of Providence avatar? The avatar gives off the Alex Jones conspiracy theory by the look of it. Okay, first and foremost, again, this is the only political statement I'm going to make. For those of you that know my political views, I am at the opposite end of the political spectrum than that of Alex Jones. I want to make that very clear. I don't even consider Alex Jones to be a credible human being at present time. Let me just put that out there. The reason why I chose the Eye of Providence for my channel and Reserved Investments pretty much symbol that represents this channel, my business, and who I am is because, number one, I do have a thing for, how do I want to say this, agnostic symbols. For instance, the pendant that I'm wearing right now is actually, if you can see it, of the Eye of Horus. So I always had a thing for those type of symbols. And number two, the Eye of Providence, the way that I use it on this channel, it's meant to represent that there's more below the surface than most people either know or see. And that's pretty much how I view collectible finance. I can tell you first and foremost, there is no other YouTuber out there that comes close to teaching classical collectible finance like I do on this channel. And all is what really collectible finance is. It's how money moves through the antiques and collectibles trade over the short term and over the long term. It's how people who want to diversify into these types of assets, how they move money in and out of these markets. And that's what I teach on this channel. And I can assure you, there is no other YouTube channel out there that gives you the depth of information that I give you on this channel. And at the end of the day, what is it that I always tell you? Most of you would be better off putting your money in financial assets and ignoring any attempt to try to invest or speculate, especially over the long term, in the antiques and collectibles trade. And I get hate mail because I state the truth on this channel. But if you are in this market for either the short term or the long term, I can teach you how to at least stack the deck in your favor so you don't end up becoming a Timmy, Kimmy, or Poindexter. So to answer your question, that's why the Eye of Providence was chosen for the symbol that represents Reserved Investments, whether it's on YouTube or whether it's off. If you look at my LinkedIn page, the Eye of Providence is clearly displayed on my LinkedIn profile that states my name and the business Reserved Investments. That's done on purpose, guys. Next question. Sean, have you ever encountered someone with similar investment interests as you when dating? Do you prefer a partner that shares your interests, or does it not matter much? Thank you so much for all you do. Okay. This is an interesting question to answer because I do get into discussions at this in my corporate job and my personal life where people kind of try to, how do I want to say this, get information out of me because I tend to keep my dating life very private. So I am going to answer it this way. I want to make this very clear. There are exceptions to every rule. So please do not get upset with the way that I'm going to answer this. But it is very clear to most people that the type of woman that I would have dated in 2014 or 2015 is vastly different to the type of woman that I am attracted to now in the year 2025. So let's just say I've had more opportunities open up in my dating life, and I have taken advantage of them. Now, what that means is I technically look for women who are college educated. I do prefer women with a master's degree if possible. I do date women with bachelor's degrees as well. I like left-leaning women. Of course, I do like women that match my political views, although sometimes, believe it or not, I do date like centrist women. Women that are just left-leaning, but they're more moderate Democrats in most cases. That's fine too. You don't have to match my exact political beliefs, but you do have to be left-leaning. I also tend to like sophisticated women. And again, there's exceptions to every rule. You know, I was never into women that have a lot of tattoos or piercings, nothing like that. I like natural beauty. And I'm going to give you some examples here. I'm attracted to Selena Gomez would be a good example. Hilary Duff, to a certain extent. I do know that she has some tattoos, but I think overall, when you see her in some of her outfits and that, she's a very beautiful woman. If you want me to even take this a step further, if you guys know who the YouTuber, and I don't mean to put her on the spot, I know that she's married, but I consider her to be a very attractive woman. If you know who Courtney Ryan is, I consider her to be a very attractive, sophisticated woman. I know that she did marry the watch guy on YouTube, but I just want to put that out there. I do think that she is very beautiful. I know that she's probably, 19, 20 years younger than me, but I'm just stating, I like sophisticated, educated women that are independent, that have their own career, that know what they want out of life. And that's also bitten me a couple of times because I always wanted to have kids. And ironically, a lot of the women that I get with that are that type, a lot of them are not having kids. So I will state that. So that is something that I kind of struggled with, where trying to navigate that, where I kind of want kids. There have been some relationships that actually fell apart because of that. I also sometimes have dated very highly sophisticated, narcissistic women. You know, I'm very good at identifying cluster B personality disordered women. I tend to stay away anymore from the borderlines, but occasionally I will end up going after a narcissistic woman who is very high functioning, and that can get me into trouble. So I say that these are some of my standards, but keep in mind there's exceptions to every rule, because one of the things that I get into debates with, sometimes even at my corporate job with women who know me or have known me for several years, is they'll say, well, gee, Sean, you really changed. Are you arrogant? Are you really egotistical in who you date and what you accept? And the answer is, in a way, yes, because of what I've achieved over the past 10 years or so. So the type of woman that I would have dated back in 2014 and 2015 is not the same as the type of woman that I would date now. Now, to really answer your question, does she have to have the same interests as me? The answer is absolutely no. As a matter of fact, I prefer to date women who are not really in the antiques and collectibles trade. It's okay if they are. I'm not going to judge them for that. But I like women that have their own interests. If she wants to collect Hermes Birkin bags or something like that, so be it. But it's definitely not a requirement. I also don't like sports. So believe it or not, guys, I normally don't go out. Like if a woman starts telling me that she's really into going to sporting events and all that, you know, I'll give you a prime example. The Eagles were in the Super Bowl and they just won the Super Bowl. And I love Philadelphia. So naturally I was rooting for the Eagles. So yes, I could sit down and watch the Super Bowl if the Eagles are in it. But ultimately, like, I'm not somebody that spends my time watching sports. I'm really not into sports. You guys know from this channel, I don't even do a lot of videos on sports trading cards or sports memorabilia. I'm up to par in that market because I'm a consultant in the trade, but overall, it's really not my thing. So I prefer women who kind of have their own unique interests. If she's into art, that's great. I love going to museums. I love cultural events. I love going to movies. I love going to orchards in the fall. I love going to Longwood Gardens, stuff like that. I really like those type of activities. So that's really what I look for in a partner, that flair of sophistication, that flair of education, something that I can latch onto, because I look for two things: somebody that I can emotionally connect with, and also have a valid, intelligent conversation with, which means they should be somewhat educated formally and also in world events. And I also, of course, look for that sexual spark, that energy where, you know what I mean, that animalistic desire has to be there as well. So I hope that answers your question. I hope that that clarifies with everyone. And let me state this again, because I know that someone's going to pull this out of context. There are exceptions to every rule. So if you don't fit that persona perfectly, it doesn't mean that I won't date you, but you have to at least be independent. Like, you shouldn't live at home with your mommy and daddy in your 30s or 40s for me to go out with you. Let's put it that way. There are certain standards that I have. So I will state that. So I hope that that clears the air here. And I hope that, you know, this doesn't make me sound like an egotistical narcissist or something by having these type of standards. I don't know what it is in our society, but it just seems to me, whenever a guy gets asked these kind of questions, he always has to be on the defensive. Or kind of like if it's a woman and she's asked, well, what are your standards for dating? She can come up with anything and it's acceptable. For a guy, though, it's kind of hard for men to answer this question in our society, because if the answer is a little bit out there, or if the guy seems like he's going after top tier women, it makes him seem like he's a narcissist. And that's what he gets labeled as. So I don't want to come across as that, but that's the type of women that I go after. The more educated, sophisticated, the type of women who just is going to bring a spark, something that's going to make me want to go out with her again, engage with her on a mental and emotional capacity as well as a sexual capacity. So that's something that all has to be there for me to act on it. Otherwise, I'd rather stay alone. And that's pretty much the truth, guys. So with that, let me go to another question now. Let's talk about antiques and collectibles. I'm done talking about dating. Next question. Sean, are first edition books ever considered pop culture, or do they always belong in their own category? For example, something like The Great Gatsby is seen as a part of literary history nowadays, whereas something like the Harry Potter still feels like a pop culture item. So what he's asking for is, are first edition books ever considered pop culture, or do they always belong in their own category? Well, you kind of answered your own question here. It depends. When we look at The Great Gatsby, the thing that you got to understand, when The Great Gatsby was published, it was F. Scott Fitzgerald's last book he ever produced. So at that particular point, he was already considered a literary icon. You can't compare The Great Gatsby to Harry Potter, because when Harry Potter was written, J.K. Rowling's, that was her first book. So as much as I like Harry Potter, and I'm not going to shit on the Harry Potter franchise, it's awesome in my opinion, you can't really compare F. Scott Fitzgerald to J.K. Rowling's. It would almost be like comparing the directorial talents of George Lucas, who created Star Wars, which the original trilogy was fantastic, I think we all agree, to that of Stanley Kubrick or Martin Scorsese. They're different talents. And when we look at the body of work that Stanley Kubrick put out, or Martin Scorsese, I think that we can agree, even as great and talented as George Lucas was with his work on Star Wars, they don't compare to the body of work of, say, Clockwork Orange, Eyes Wide Shut, Full Metal Jacket, The Shining, movies like that caliber. So that's how I'm looking at this. So it really depends. I see Harry Potter as rooted in pop culture. that doesn't mean at some point in the future it can't become a literary classic. If we look at The Wizard of Oz, when The Wizard of Oz was first published, that was kind of considered pop culture. It wasn't until many, many decades, many years later, that it became a literary classic. If you look at the book Charlotte's Web is now considered a literary classic. And if you've ever read Charlotte's Web in, junior high school, maybe elementary school, it's really not on par with The Great Gatsby, guys. So it's interesting how time changes the fiber, changes the dynamic as to how some of these classic books are categorized. You know, I've said this before. I'm a huge fan, and I almost am ashamed to admit this, but I can relate to this book because I have a similar attachment style as the main character. If you've ever read 50 Shades of Grey, 50 Shades of Grey, it's going to be very interesting to see how society, and not only that, but from a literary perspective, how that book is going to be viewed 50 to 100 years out. Because make no mistake, whether you like it or not, 50 Shades of Grey did have a profound effect on literature as we know it. I mean, this was a book that sold very well. And if you read it, I hate to say this, it's really not written that well. It's actually written by somebody that really comes across as only having less than a high school education. I mean, if you read it, it's very simplistically written. But it did appeal to a wide audience because of the storyline and some of the more forbidden themes. Let me word it that way so it's YouTube friendly. But I will tell you, it's going to be interesting how that book is perceived 50 to 100 years from now. Does that mean that you should be running out to buy a first edition of that book? No, there's too many out there. It was pretty much published by demand. I don't think it's going to be worth a shit ton of money in the future. But it is interesting how some of these ideas, some of these books that are published, how society views them 50 to 100 years later. So I hope that answers your question in full. If you want me to read the rest of your question, another way to ask it would be to say, would The Great Gatsby have been considered a pop culture item when it was first released? The answer is no, simply because F. Scott Fitzgerald was already an established, well-known literary author at that particular point in time. And I'll also tell you something else. Here's a little Easter egg for you. The Great Gatsby was actually a semi-autobiographical book written about his life. And it's very interesting because when he died right when that book came out. He actually died in his early 40s. He drank himself to death. He was an alcoholic. He was really in a bad state. And when that book came out, he actually thought it was going to be a failure. As a matter of fact, that book never really sold that well compared to his other literary works. It wasn't until decades later that people looked back fondly on that book and said, wow, this is one of his best works ever. And when it came out, critics hated it. I mean, I can show you literal reviews of that book from newspaper articles that premiered back when that book was first published in the 1920s, where the critics tore that book apart. They hated it. It didn't become well known until much later because of the universal theme of the book. So that's an interesting Easter egg about that. Next question. Sean, do you have any tips on scaling an eBay collectibles business? And how did you go about selling your eBay business back then? Congrats on 18,000 subscribers. You're the GOAT. You know, guys, side note here, I honestly never knew what GOAT meant. I actually had to look it up. When I first started getting called the GOAT, I honestly thought that everybody was insulting me on the internet. So I didn't know what it meant, I guess because I'm approaching 50. I'm 48 years of age right now. So I literally had to Google what GOAT meant when I first started hearing that on this channel in the comment section. I thought that people were just insulting me constantly. I'm like, they're calling me a goat? Goat's not an attractive animal. Why am I being called a goat? I had to actually look it up. So that's a side note, guys. I'm sorry about that. But to answer your question, first of all, I'm going to answer the last part first. Back when eBay was a thing, when eBay first became a thing in the mid-1990s all the way up through the early 2000s, it was pretty much the Wild Wild West. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but you used to be able to build an eBay business, meaning you would have an account and you would sell stuff and you would get to several thousand feedback. You would be able to sell that account to somebody else, meaning back in the day, you used to be able to transfer an eBay account to someone else and they could write you a check for that account. It was perfectly within eBay's guidelines because back then, eBay didn't require you to provide your social security number to sell on eBay. So all is what it was really linked to was your name and address and phone number. Well, you could be very easily, you could update the contact information and you could transfer that account to another party. So when I sold my original business, Electro Games, that's why if you look at my current eBay account under Electro Games, it says, I think, established in like 2003 or something, because the original account was sold. It was transferred to the business that bought that company. So eBay was very, very lax in their rules and regulations back in the day. It was the wild, wild west. As a matter of fact, I had mentors back on eBay back in the day. What they would do is they would go to flea markets and they would buy items that cost like $1 or $2, and they would flip them on the eBay for like $3 or $4. They would build up an account, get to like 5,000 in feedback, and they would sell off the account. And there were people that literally wanted to buy an established eBay account. So they would pay top dollar for it. So some of my mentors were getting like $5,000 to $10,000 for an account that had 5,000 feedback in it. And all is what they did. They were making money while building the business, and then they would just sell the account. Now, I did something different. I actually had an import-export video game business where I started out going to flea markets. I then made contact with a lot of suppliers and retailers in Japan overseas, and I started importing a shit ton of vintage video games. And I was really getting into, back in the day, PC Engine, Sega Mega Drive, Neo Geo, Super Graphics. I remember when the Sega Saturn came out, I started getting really big in import Saturn games. And where I lucked out is I would make contact with a lot of these guys over in Japan that when they would try to sell on eBay, because it was a US market, a lot of the US buyers didn't want to pay the increased shipping costs to buy like a Super Graphics directly from Japan. So what I did was I made agreements with these guys and I said, hey, if I give you $10,000 or $20,000 and you ship me all of these games and systems that I want over in the US, will you give me a discount? And what would happen was I would only have to really pay one shipping fee to get all that stuff over here. Then I would sell it on my own eBay account. And because I was a US seller, I could charge a premium because a lot of the other people in the US that were buying this stuff from Japan, they didn't then have to pay shipping from Japan. That's how I made a lot of money. Now, if you're asking me how I would tell you to scale an eBay business today, what I did back in the day is we had publications like Penny Pincher. Some of those publications, you know, that you go to a store and you get free and you can see like classified ads from people, what they're buying and selling. That's how I did it back in the day. Today, you can easily do that with Instagram. You could do that with social media. You could do that if you have a YouTube presence. So that's what I would tell you to do. I would try to convince you to get fully in depth in specializing in a particular collectible or product and actually build a following around it. Like this is really big right now with Pokemon. There's a lot of people I respect, believe it or not, in the Pokemon space because they're getting into it and they're doing it the right way. They're not going to Costco, they're not going to Sam Clubs and beating up a 14-year-old kid to get his Pokemon cards to flip them on eBay. If you want to build a Pokemon business, do it the right way. Either go out and buy collections of vintage cards, get yourself an Instagram account, get yourself well known on social media and have people come to you and offer to sell you collections, or get with a distributor and start doing it that way, legitimize the business. So it just depends on what you want to get into. There's ways to scale an eBay business today. It's just that you got to understand it's not as easy as it was back then when I did it, where there were virtually no regulations, no rules. And if you went to a yard sale and you told somebody, hey, I'm going to sell this on eBay, they looked at you like you were nuts because they didn't even know what the hell eBay was back then. Literally, the first 4 years that eBay was in existence, roughly from like late 1995 when it was called Auction Web, all the way up to like 2000, 2001, nobody knew what the hell eBay was. So you would clean up at yard sales, flea markets, antique marts, wherever you were going to get this stuff. It was a gold mine. It was very easy to make money back then. The problem that you have today, everybody's doing it. Everybody wants into the collectibles trade because they view it as a panacea of wealth. That's what we talk about all day long on this channel. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you are correct. You do have to scale it. My biggest problem with like the eBay thrifter crowd, those guys are stuck at the bottom rung of the resale market. So they're dependent solely on going to thrift stores, flea markets, yard sales, looking at like Facebook marketplace posts, hoping that they find something that they can flip. You don't want to stay at that level. That's what I preach against on this channel. If you are stuck at that level, you are doing something wrong. You start at that level, then you build up. Case in point, when I started going to flea markets, I can tell you guys some funny stories. I remember, I'll pick on Jake's Flea Market. You can look this up in Bartow, Pennsylvania, in the middle of the country. Okay, it's like still like 3 or 4 miles away from me in Boyertown. I remember going there in the morning, and I remember if you would get there at like 5 or 6 o'clock to get the good stuff. Like the flea market would open at 7. You would start going around while people were still setting up. I remember the smell, the horrible smell of the porta potties. Literally, like when it started getting hot, like if you would go to that flea market in July and August, I still remember that stench. And that's why I literally had that stench stuck in my mind for so many years. That's why I wanted to get away from having to go to flea markets to find my stuff. It was that stench that stayed with me. The hot July sun in Pennsylvania at the time, like at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, hitting that porta potty, everybody would smell it. And that's what got me out of the lower rung of the resale business. I'm going to be 100% honest with you. It was like I didn't want to tolerate that anymore. Now, to be fair, at my age, do I still go to flea markets from time to time? Yeah, I have a lot of fun. Am I expecting to find anything really valuable? Is my livelihood dependent upon that? No. So that's the difference. But if you are at that level, you really, if you want to pull ahead, you do have to scale your business. And again, I would tell you in this day and age, try to develop, even if it's just a small social media following, where you have people that are coming to you, you're a straight shooter, they trust you, you can go after Pokemon cards, vintage video games, comic books, whatever it is, vintage toys. If you specialize in those areas or even all of those areas and you learn the ropes, you can build a business that way. You do not want to be dependent on what you find at thrift stores, flea markets, and yard sales, especially in the year 2025 when everybody knows the value of this stuff. I hope that answered your question. If you do want to hear more stories about my early time on eBay or how I sold my business, I can reveal certain things. I can't tell you who I sold it to. I did actually sign a non-disclosure agreement with that. But I can give you clues as to what state that particular company was in. But it's really not going to help you because the business that bought my business pretty much changed over the years. So you're not going to be able to identify it. But make no mistake, I had a major vintage video game and import video game operation back in the 1990s and early 2000s, and I profited. I sold the business for 6 figures. That's what really kind of set me up back then. I sold it right before the financial crisis. So right around 2007, 2008, and I hid it from everybody. My parents really didn't even know the full details. So it's a very fascinating story. So that is what I will tell you. If you do want to know more, though, I can tell you more. I just can't tell you who I sold it to. That's the only thing I can't reveal. Next question. Sean, congratulations. Truly amazing that a YouTube channel on collectibles finance has grown to 18,000. A testament to your knowledge, perseverance, and talent. Question. Investment potential of Mont Blanc fountain pens, particularly the limited editions. Okay, this is where we talk about very niche markets. This is where we talk about specialty collectibles. Let's be realistic. If you're going to collect Rolex watches, there's a viable secondary market for those products. If you're going to collect Mont Blanc fountain pens, there is a limited market for that particular type of collectible. That's the problem that you're going to run into. I do own some Mont Blanc fountain pens. They are beautiful works of art. Do I have one around here that I can show you? No, it's in my office, other 2 floors up. I have one of those pens. And they are beautiful works of art, no doubt. But it is a specialty market if you are going to collect and invest in those items. Keep that in mind. Now, if you have the ability to buy a lot of this stuff, if you're really an expert in it, and you want to become the foremost important dealer of this on eBay, and you're able to build a business doing it, you do you. But from an investment standpoint, I would tell you to be very cautious in this market, just like any other specialty market. Doesn't matter if you tell me you're collecting antique and vintage fishing lures. It doesn't matter if you tell me that you're collecting, vintage or antique marbles. They're all specialty markets. Be very careful in markets that are that niche compared to, say, the market for vintage comic books or rare coins or Pokemon cards or vintage toys and action figures. That's something that you got to be aware of. Niche markets are very, very risky, especially over the long term. So that's all you need to be aware of. Next question. Sean, what are your thoughts on mental health and becoming obsessed with collecting? I find obsessing can actually yield good results when deciding what to purchase. I feel like I might have an undiagnosed mental condition. Much love. Okay, I am very big fan of getting into therapy. Everybody out there, whether you realize it or not, you probably have unresolved trauma. So even outside the world of collecting, I honestly think that most people should embrace getting involved in mental health therapy, meaning sitting down at least once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, and talking with a licensed mental health psychiatrist or psychologist, one or the other, and working through your issues. And if you do have any form of childhood trauma, you need to work through that before you get into a relationship, before you end up harming yourself or anyone else. That is paramount. So I always do advocate for mental health. This is why I am against, when we talk about dating advice, the toxic red pill manosphere, because most of those guys, they don't want to get into therapy and they don't want to work through their issues. They just want to watch their wonderful Rollo Tomassi, Andrew Tate videos that have this fake copium that aren't even rooted in real science or facts. It's pseudoscience, and they want to sit there and blame women for all their problems. If you are someone who is struggling in any area of your life, whether it's your professional career, your dating life, friendships, social situations, your business life, your financial life, you need to get in therapy and you need to work through your issues. Now, what does this have to do with what you just asked? In the collectibles trade, we see a lot of people that unfortunately succumb to hoarding. And believe it or not, you can be a wealthy individual. You can have all your monetary needs met. But if you are constantly buying stuff and you are addicted to buying stuff and putting it in your house, even putting it in off-site climate-controlled storage, even if all your bills are paid and you don't consider the fact that you may have a problem, you possibly do have a hoarding disorder. You know, everybody has seen American Pickers. Everybody has seen some of the situations on the show Hoarders. It doesn't always appear like that, guys. You really have to take a good stock of your mental health. I've said this before and I'll say it again. There's a lot of people that are involved in the antiques and collectibles trade, and they're actually obsessed with shopping. They have a shopping addiction, and everything that they buy, they consider it to be a quote-unquote investment or a quote-unquote asset, which in all actuality, I'm sorry, I really hate those terminologies because some assets and some investments are better than others. This is what I preach to the wonderful Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, great at video game Pokemon crowd. If all your money is in assets that have no underlying cash flows, you are in trouble and you don't even realize it. I've said this before. Everybody always asks me, what should the biggest asset be that a person can own? It should be a brokerage account that you have access to that is comprised of financial assets with underlying cash flows. It should not be any type of collection. It should not be cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, gold, silver. It should be assets with underlying cash flows. And I can do a whole video on that if you guys need me to, why that is the answer, okay? So if you do have this type of mental makeup where you're consistently buying stuff, you're obsessed with tracking the market, you're doing a lot of market research, in most cases, I'm here to tell you, you probably have some form of a hoarding disorder. It doesn't mean that your whole house looks like an episode of Hoarders, but it can mean that you lean towards that direction. People who have shopping addictions, they have that problem. And there's a lot of people in the antiques and collectibles trade, I'm sorry to say, that do have these types of disorders. And they look at everything as a quote-unquote investment. Even when Reserved Investments comes along and tells them, hey, that's a very bad investment, they'll come back and they'll be like, but it's an asset. And I have to state to them, certain assets are better than others. For instance, an S&P 500 index fund is linked to underlying cash flows. If you own real estate that you rent out as an investment property, that has underlying cash flows. That is a much better asset in most cases than parking your money in video games, rare coins, comic books, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, gold, and silver. So that is what I will tell you. If you want an excellent book to read to help you through this, read The Psychology of Money. Go look it up on Amazon. Just type in Psychology of Money. It'll come right up. I think you can get the book shipped to you for less than $15 if I'm not mistaken. It's well worth reading. Another book I'll recommend to you that goes into this a little bit, Killer Stuff and Tons of Money. Look up that book. You can probably get it on Amazon or eBay. You can probably get a used copy for like $15 or less. Those are two great books to read on this subject. Next question. Sean, what are your thoughts on the current and future outlook for the rare coins and currency market? Okay, I know this is going to come a surprise as to the wonderful Pokemon Timmies, Kimmies, Poindexters, not Pokemon collectors. I'm talking about the Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters that constantly cut me up in the comment section below. It's also going to come a surprise to some of the people that were really caught up in the hype of the great video game marketplace in the beginning, where a lot of games came on the scene and allegedly manipulated the market. But coins and currency is still to this day one of the strongest and most liquid markets in the entire antiques and collectibles trade. As a matter of fact, right now, the currency market in particular, graded paper money, is really growing by leaps and bounds. And if you would have literally taken my advice and invested in this market, like say 4 years ago, when this channel was still in its infancy, you'd be sitting pretty right now. So I do have a bright and rosy outlook for coins and currency. You just have to understand, though, that prices have risen exponentially since the pandemic. And a lot of those prices, for the most part, stayed at those high levels. So you have to have realistic expectations going forward. What's most likely going to happen is with coins and currency, I'll tell you, in most of these areas of the market, expect a 3 to 5% gain per year in most cases. There are certain particular coins and pieces of currency that will go gangbusters. I honestly couldn't tell you which ones they are, because if we look at what went gangbusters in the last few years, it was almost unpredictable. It was pretty much across the board, but there were several surprises, most notably with $500 and $1,000 notes. $500 and $1,000 notes, also known as large size, small size currency, meaning large denomination because they're $500, $1,000 denomination notes, those accelerated in value exponentially. And I honestly didn't see that coming. Another sector of the market that I did accurately predict was the market for large size silver certificates. That market caught on fire. So that I did expect, but I was kind of caught off guard with the rise in popularity amongst high-grade $500 and $1,000 notes. Just to put this in perspective for you, it used to be several years ago, you used to be able to buy a PMG 64 EPQ $500 note for like $1,500 or $2,000. Go look at what they cost now. You're going to pay like $3 to $4 grand in most cases. $1,000 notes, even in PMG 65 EPQ, used to cost maybe $3,000. I remember $3,500 tops. Now they're over $5 grand. I guarantee you, if you want one in gem mint, PMG 65 EPQ condition, you're probably talking $5,000 or more in today's market. And I haven't done research on them in quite a while, but I'm just telling you, the amount of money that has flowed into that market is insane. And I told you guys that would happen because a lot of the people that made money in cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, they're cashing it out and they're putting it in real assets. This is what gave rise also to a lot of the collectible booms over the past few years that weren't related to COVID specifically, the government giving out free money. And one of the markets that I told you was going to get hit hard was coins and currency. There's a lot of people that listen to my advice. They listen to other experts in the trade. And we always tell you guys, coins and currency are the backbone of the antiques and collectibles trade. They are the most liquid collectible you can put your money in at present time. And there's a lot of wealthy people that put their money in those type of asset classes. So good question. I hope that answers your question in full. Next question. Sean, thank you for your amazing videos. Would love to see videos of your thoughts and opinions on current events happening in the world, tales from Sean's past, and could you do more vids on single stocks like how you profited big during the coronavirus era? Thank you again. I always look forward to watching your content, and I'm curious as to what you put out next. Okay, I kind of botched the end there, but you get the meaning here. I would actually like to do more videos on world events, politics, but unfortunately, a lot of my subscribers probably wouldn't be happy with me, given my political views and also how I fall on the scale of how I analyze certain things that are happening in the world with cultural events, current events, finance, and everything else in between. So most likely that'll never happen. What I will tell you is from time to time, you will hear me go off on a rant on some of these current events, some of my political views and the like. I just hope that my audience, who may have a different opinion than me at times, doesn't get mad at me when I do discuss those particular events. I have thought about starting a second channel at some point where I just talk about relationships, politics, finance, things that really don't fall under the category of collectible finance. But in all honesty, given how much time I have and how limited it is, it probably wouldn't get off the ground anytime soon. I'm going to be very honest with you, but I would like to do more on those topics. It's just, I know it's a sensitive subject with some of the people that come here just to hear my thoughts on collectible finance and not much else. And I do respect those individuals as well. As for your question about how I profited on single stocks during the coronavirus era and also during the financial crisis, 2007, 2008, for those unaware, I do have a background in finance. With that being said, I was able to look for trends. Like, it was very obvious to me during the financial crisis, real estate was getting hammered the worst at that particular point in time because the whole financial crisis was caused by the real estate market. So it was very easy for me to just look at a simple real estate index fund and go, hey, that's undervalued right now. Let's park a lot of money in there and see what happens. And it just paid off. During the coronavirus crash, it was very simple as well to see what was happening with oil stocks. I made a lot of money investing in Occidental Petroleum. If you are aware of that company, the stock dropped all the way down to $9 to $10 a share. And I went in, utilized several different brokerage accounts, and started just building a position in that particular company. Well, when the stock shot back up to like $50 a share, I started selling my holdings. That's how I made money in that market. I also went after energy ETFs, exchange traded funds. I have a fairly large position across 4 different brokerage accounts of the Vanguard VDE Energy Fund ETF. I also made a lot of money in ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil took a beating during the coronavirus. And I did the same thing with ExxonMobil because when I was hearing stories of some of these oil tankers that were like sitting full of oil because everybody was working from home, everybody was indoors, I knew that that wouldn't last. So once you get to a certain point, guys, even if you're not educated in finance, you can kind of spot trends. And if you are willing to take the risk, if you're right, you can make a lot of money. If you're wrong, you can also lose a lot of money. That's why I really don't recommend individual stocks for the average person. Now, once you start getting upwards of 6 figures in an investment account, you can take a little bit of risks, just as long as you're willing to learn from those risks. Now, me, I'm the type, I don't like gambling. I don't like betting against odds. I tend to only go after things that I know are a surefire hit. And I kind of knew in these 2 scenarios that I would make money, given what was happening in the overall world at the time. So it's only in those scenarios that I tend to go in and go after individual stocks if I know specifically what I'm doing. I don't put myself on par, nowhere near, with Warren Buffett or any of the top investors of the world. One thing that you learn in finance school, or business school, I should say, if you take a lot of courses on finance, is that you're probably not as smart as you think you are. This is why, like, I always have to laugh. Like, a lot of these dudes that never went to college, they'll be like on Wall Street bets thinking that they're the next Warren Buffett or the next Gordon Gekko, who is the fictitious character of the movie Wall Street. And it's like hilarious just to see some of the decisions they make, not understanding that if you're like playing in the options market, you're pretty much betting on time. You're not utilizing financial knowledge to make money in the market if you're betting on options. And that's why most people educated in finance don't trade options. I don't trade options. Most of my money is sitting in index-based mutual funds and ETFs. That's where I prefer to hold the majority of my wealth, that and real estate. Believe it or not, individual stocks, any type of speculative assets, even antiques or collectibles, that will never ever be the majority of my portfolio. And with that, I'm going to end part 1 of the 18,000 subscriber Q&A series. Let me know if you got anything out of this. If you hated it, let me know that in the comment section below. And I will see you in part 2, provided you're interested in this type of content. Because keep in mind, I will be uploading original content to this channel in between these Q&A series. Thank you for watching. I value all of you. Thank you for helping me get this channel to 18,000 subscribers, and I will see you in the next video.